If you are running, well, a billion-dollar retail brand right now,
Yeah.
the most dangerous thing you can do with artificial intelligence is to pick a favorite.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And yet, I mean, if you look at the business world over the past couple of years, you've probably pictured these incredibly tense, high-stakes boardroom meetings where executives are trying to do exactly that.
Right. They think they have to make this massive choice.
Exactly.
Right.
It's treated as this rigid binary. On one side, you have the advocates for closed-weight AI models. Those are the big proprietary walled gardens where you pay a tech giant for access to their state-of-the-art system.
Right.
And on the other side, you have the champions of open-weight models where the underlying architecture is, largely available for developers to download and run themselves.
Yeah. And the assumption is that you just have to pick a lane. And whichever path you choose basically dictates the entire technological future of your company.
Which is terrifying for a leadership team.
It is. It's framed as this grand philosophical commitment. Leadership teams feel this immense pressure to make a top-down decision, carve it in stone, and mandate a single AI architecture across every single department.
From supply chain logistics all the way to customer service.
Exactly.
But today, for you listening, whether you're a tech enthusiast trying to make sense of the noise, or prepping for a corporate strategy meeting, or just insanely curious about how retail actually operates behind the curtain, we have a shortcut.
A very helpful one.
Yeah, we are unpacking a single highly insightful source today. It's an article by Shish S. titled "One Model Isn't Enough: A Portfolio Approach to AI in Retail and CPG." And the mission of this deep dive is to show you why that massive high-stakes boardroom debate we just talked about is completely misguided.
What's fascinating here is that the company's actually extracting real, measurable financial value from AI right now. They aren't picking a side in that debate at all.
They're just opting out.
Basically, yeah. They realized early on that framing their AI strategy as a single monumental choice actually gets in the way of getting the work done. They've stopped treating it as a side to pick altogether.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the author brings up an analogy that I think perfectly dismantles this one-size-fits-all AI myth.
Right, the supplier analogy.
Yeah, they compare choosing an AI model to how a retail merchandising team thinks about its supplier base. Like, if you're running a massive department store, you don't just find one single vendor and demand they provide your high-end electronics, your winter coats, and your fresh groceries.
No, that would be a logistical disaster.
Right. You build a dynamic portfolio, you match specific suppliers to specific categories, and you constantly revisit that mix as seasonal trends change.
That is the ideal framework, yeah.
Yeah.
The fundamental misunderstanding driving all that boardroom anxiety is the idea that closed-weight frontier models and fine-tuned open-weight models are somehow competing for the exact same job.
And they are.
They absolutely are not. They're uniquely suited to entirely different parts of a company's value chain. The data we're seeing shows that organizations that combine them strategically, matching the architecture to the task, they consistently outperform the ones that lock themselves into a single model.
I understand the theory there, but let me push back on the operational reality for a second.
Sure.
Because from a traditional IT perspective, isn't it just infinitely easier and cleaner to buy one massive AI system from the top down and apply it universally?
Right.
I mean, you get one vendor contract, one enterprise system for your employees to learn, one piece of software handling everything. Historically, in corporate tech, simplicity and consolidation usually win, right? Doesn't a complex portfolio just create a massive headache?
It definitely sounds simpler on paper to have one vendor or one throat to choke, as they say in IT.
Right.
But in practice, it is incredibly inefficient and cost prohibitive. Imagine using a highly paid corporate attorney to proofread your weekly grocery list.
That would be a huge waste of money.
Exactly. It's a profound waste of specialized capability. Frontier closed models, the massive ones developed by the biggest tech labs, have incredible generalized reasoning capabilities. But because they are so massive, they require immense computing power.
Which makes them very expensive to run.
Extremely. Open-weight models, on the other hand, might not have that broad, worldly reasoning out of the box, but they can be trained to do narrow, repetitive tasks flawlessly at a tiny fraction of the cost.
So if you use a massive frontier model for a basic sorting task.
Yeah, if your system executes that 1,000,000 times a day, your daily computing costs will completely wipe out any margin you hope to save. They just belong in different arenas.
Which brings us to how this portfolio approach actually looks on the ground for retailers. The source points out a very clear dividing line in retail operations.
It's a really stark contrast.
Yeah. When reading this, I kept thinking about the staff at a high-end restaurant. You have the front of house and the back of house.
Oh, I like that.
In the front, you have the maître. Their job is to greet you, read your mood, navigate unpredictable human emotions, and set the tone for the entire evening. But in the back of house, you have the prep cooks.
They aren't chatting with the guests.
No, they're chopping 1,000 onions an hour with absolute machine-like precision. So for retailers, that front of house represents their customer-facing work, and the back of house is their internal operations.
That analogy holds up beautifully when you look at how these models actually work. Let's look at the front of house first. For a retailer, this is where the frontier closed models like Anthropic's Claude, for example, truly earn their high price tag.
Right.
We're talking about deploying AI for interactive shopping assistance, complex customer service escalation, or generating specialized merchandising copy that absolutely must reflect a nuanced brand voice.
So in those areas, it's the generalized judgment and conversational reliability that carry the most weight.
Exactly, because customers are unpredictable.
Yeah, if a shopper asks a complex, multi-part question about sizing and return policies, and your shopping assistant starts hallucinating or sounding like a weird robot, the brand takes an immediate reputational hit.
The human element is exactly why you need the heavy hitter there. The quality of the AI's reasoning in those unpredictable moments directly impacts the customer's experience. You can't compromise on reasoning there. You need the maitre d'.
But then you step into the back of house.
Right, the internal operations. This is where the open weight models shine. Retailers take these smaller open source models and aggressively fine-tune them on their own historical transaction data and product catalogs.
The prep cooks chopping the onions.
Exactly. They deploy them purely for high-volume, highly repetitive tasks.
We're talking about things like SKU tagging, right? And for anyone outside the retail bubble, a SKU is just the stock-keeping unit, basically the digital fingerprint for every product on the shelf.
Right, and accurately tagging that inventory across thousands of categories is a massive chore.
The text also mentions classifying planograms, which is mapping out where products belong on physical shelves to maximize sales, or running internal chatbots just to help staff find company policies.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it all comes down to the underlying economics of computing. For those internal tasks, a major retailer's software might be making millions of API calls a day.
Just constantly pinging the AI.
Yeah, and an API call is simply the moment the software asks the AI to process a piece of info. When you're making millions of those requests, cost per token, which is the tiny fraction of a cent you pay to process a word, becomes the ultimate deciding factor.
Wow, so the volume just dictates the cost.
Precisely. A smaller open-weight model, hyper-specialized for that narrow task, does the job just as well as the massive frontier model, but without the massive overhead.
Okay, so that split architecture works perfectly when your primary job is just putting boxes on shelves and selling them. But the calculus completely changes when we transition to the manufacturers actually making the products.
Oh, completely. The consumer packaged goods companies.
Yeah, the CPGs. For them, that restaurant analogy breaks down entirely. The dividing line is no longer customer-facing versus internal operations.
It shifts to something much more tightly regulated. For manufacturers, the dividing line is defined by intellectual property risk and regulatory exposure. The stakes are just structurally different.
How so?
Well, think about a major CPG brand manufacturing cosmetics or household cleaners. They are dealing with exact chemical formulation data. They have to manage claims substantiation, which means legally proving that a specific lotion actually reduces wrinkles.
Right.
And they're navigating complex trade promotion strategies and heavily regulated safety language.
You definitely do not want an AI hallucinating the safety warnings on a bottle of industrial bleach, just if save a fraction of a cent on computing costs.
Absolutely not. The cost of getting regulatory language wrong is catastrophic. It means massive lawsuits and recalls. So for those high-stakes tasks, manufacturers absolutely require closed frontier models with rigorous enterprise-grade safety tooling.
They need it to be bulletproof.
They need the highest level of reliability and, crucially, an ironclad audit trail. If regulators come knocking, the company has to prove exactly how and why a piece of copy or a safety claim was generated. Capability and governance completely outweigh daily cost considerations there.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text then talks about how these same CPG brands use the open weight side of their portfolio. It says open models earn their keep in the demand signal layer.
Right.
We're talking about parsing mountains of point-of-sale data, summarizing physical shelf audits from thousands of grocery stores, and generating early drafts of marketing copy. But the source claims these brands can execute this in-house at an agency scale.
Yes, they can.
Wait, if they're acting like a massive data agency parsing all this proprietary sales data, how do they do that without feeding their secret sauce into someone else's model? If I'm a massive brand, I'm not sending sensitive sales data over the open internet.
That is precisely the mechanism that makes open-weight models so valuable for them. You aren't renting access over the internet.
Oh, I see.
By using an open-weight model, a brand can take the underlying architecture and install it directly onto their own physical servers or heavily guarded private clouds. They fine-tune it on their proprietary brand language and highly sensitive point-of-sale data locally.
Ah, so it never pings an outside API. There's no pipeline to the outside internet where a competitor could intercept their market strategy.
Exactly. It creates a completely closed, secure loop of proprietary intelligence. And because it's running on their own infrastructure, the economics scale incredibly well for massive data sets.
So no outside agency could ever match the speed or the low cost of parsing 10,000 shelf audits because the brand owns the fine-tuned AI model doing the heavy lifting locally.
Spot on.
Okay, so we've covered the established retail giants and the legacy manufacturers. They have the capital to build these sophisticated split architectures, but we have to talk about startups.
Yes, the dynamic is very different there.
Right, because when you picture a scrappy tech startup, the assumption is they're in a garage somewhere, bootstrapping everything, and hacking together free open-source models to save every penny.
It's the classic startup image.
But the source material says the exact opposite. It argues that early-stage startups should explicitly prioritize paid, closed models. Why would they spend their limited runway on the most expensive option?
Because for a startup in those crucial early days, the deciding factor isn't intellectual property protection or internal versus external workflows. The deciding factor is simple survival. It's capital efficiency and time to market.
Just getting a product out the door.
Exactly. In the pre-seed or seed stages, a startup is racing against the clock to prove to investors that their core product actually works. If they try to host a free open-weight model themselves, they suddenly inherit an incredibly complex back-end infrastructure nightmare.
They essentially become an IT infrastructure company instead of a retail innovator.
Exactly the problem. They don't have the headcount. They don't have a dedicated DevOps team managing server provisioning or troubleshooting latency issues.
Right.
If you host the model yourself and your server goes down from a traffic spike, the founders are the ones awake at 3 a.m. trying to reboot servers instead of building their business strategy.
So by simply renting a Frontier API, they pay OpenAI or Anthropic to handle the heavy lifting.
Yeah, they completely remove that massive infrastructure burden. They trade a slightly higher cost per transaction for the speed and agility they desperately need to survive those first 12 months.
So when does the portfolio approach actually kick in for them? Because they can't just rent expensive computing power forever if they want to scale profit margins.
This raises an important question about how they transition. Incorporating open-weight models only makes sense later on the timeline, usually between seed and Series A funding.
Once they're a bit more established.
Right. By that point, they've proven that a specific high-volume feature is actually valuable. The daily usage patterns are clear. Once you know exactly what the AI needs to do 1,000,000 times a day and the revenue attached to it, you can finally justify hiring engineers to fine-tune an open model.
Because at that stage, the return on investment for building your own infrastructure is actually measurable.
Exactly.
Which raises a massive logistical hurdle. If a startup or even a legacy brand is trying to transition from rented APIs to owned infrastructure, how do they physically manage that?
It's a huge challenge.
I mean, we've spent this whole time discussing why you need a portfolio of models. But practically speaking, how does a company actually manage 10 different AI models without creating total IT chaos? If you have 5 different billing contracts and 5 security protocols, the whole system breaks down.
That is the operational friction that historically stopped companies from adopting a true portfolio approach. The DevOps nightmare of gluing disparate systems together often outweighed the theoretical cost savings. But the landscape is shifting rapidly.
So, what does this all mean for the engineering departments actually tasked with executing this? The source specifically points to Microsoft Foundry as the blueprint.
Yeah, Microsoft's platform is highlighted because it illustrates the modern solution to that exact IT nightmare. Platforms like Microsoft Foundry, which consolidates their Azure cloud services, don't force a company to choose between open and closed architectures.
They just offer everything.
Basically, they act as a unified hosting environment. Foundry currently hosts a catalog of over 10,000 different AI models.
10,000. And the source notes, they are adding roughly 50 new ones every single month. That is an impossible pace for a standalone IT department to vet independently.
It is a staggering pace of innovation, and this centralized catalog spans everything we've discussed.
Wow.
Massive reasoning models, small language models, multimodal models that process images and audio.
Wow.
It includes offerings from OpenAI, Anthropic's Claude, Meta, Mistral AI, essentially all the major players, both open and closed, hosted in one single secure environment.
So the key takeaway here is that a retailer doesn't have to build custom pipelines for every single tool. They can run a massive closed model like Claude for their high-end shopping assistant, and at the exact same time run a fine-tuned open source Llama model to handle their back-of-house SKU tagging.
Yes, and it all happens under the exact same Azure tenancy. It's one unified governance setup, one security perimeter, and one billing relationship.
That centralized infrastructure changes the entire strategic game. It removes all that friction.
It really does. It allows a business to execute the dynamic portfolio strategy seamlessly. You rent massive capability for speed when solving a complex problem. You own the infrastructure for cost control when the volume demands it. And you fine-tune small models when your proprietary data is your competitive moat.
And because it's all governed through a single pane of glass, the technical nightmare of swapping models in and out just completely disappeared.
And when you add in the seamless integrations with the tools that frontline workers are already using, like Dynamics 365 or Fabric for data analytics, the entire conversation shifts.
It's no longer an abstract boardroom debate about AI philosophy.
Exactly. The question for executives is no longer which AI model is mathematically the most advanced.
Yeah.
The question simply becomes which specific daily workflow needs support right now.
Right.
Once you identify the workflow like generating marketing copy or auditing shelf space, you just reach into your centralized catalog, select the model that fits the cost and capability requirements, and plug it in.
It is purely an allocation exercise at that point. And that brings us to the ultimate summary of this deep dive for you listening. The great, dramatic, open versus closed AI debate that has dominated headlines. It is effectively dead.
At least for the companies actually moving the needle in retail and CPG.
Yeah. The winning strategy today is to build a highly flexible infrastructure, fit the specific model to the specific task, and constantly revisit that portfolio mix as the technology evolves.
It requires a fundamental shift in leadership philosophy. You have to move away from a rigid IT mindset and embrace a highly adaptive, modular approach.
Absolutely. It's about agility, not loyalty to a single brand. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds on the implications of this portfolio strategy, but wasn't explicitly spelled out in the source text.
Okay, what is it?
If businesses are successfully building these universal infrastructures, where 10,000 different models are constantly being swapped in and out behind the scenes, based purely on cost per token and efficiency, how long until the brand name of the AI becomes completely invisible and irrelevant to the companies using them?
Wow. That is a profound implication for the AI industry itself.
Think about it. We talk about Claude or Llama or OpenAI today with such reverence, treating them like marquee software products. But eventually, if it's all just routing automatically in the background through platforms like Azure to find the cheapest path for a task, AI stops being a branded product you boast about.
It just becomes a utility.
Exactly. Just like electricity or water. When you plug a blender into the wall, you don't care which regional power plant generated specific electrons, as long as the blades spin when you push the button.
Right. You just need it to work.
Are we heading to a near future where AI is just the invisible, commoditized current powering the workflow? Keep that perspective in mind the next time you see a breathless headline announcing a massive new AI model. The brand name might not matter nearly as much as where it fits in the portfolio. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.